From a bizarre zombie worm that eats bone to a skull found at the top of a cave where no human could ever reach, here are 10 disturbing and creepy recent scientific discoveries. Number 10. Black sarcophagus. There was a 2,000-year-old black sarcophagus unearthed in Egypt in 2018, and immediately, when pictures were published of the strange artifact, people began speculating on what it meant. They claimed that it was cursed, which is a reasonable thing to think, as it was an unmarked, black coffin filled with unknown remains of ancient Egyptians. Of course, scientists were not scared of the possibility of a curse, even though tons of everyday people wondered if it would mean that a powerful magic mummy would step out and end the world. What did they find in it when they cracked it open? A disgusting reddish-brown liquid and the remains of 3 Egyptian military officers. The reddish-brown liquid was probably a mixture of the bodily fluids of those men and the embalming fluid that was used to store and preserve their bodies. It had an awful stench, but the key issue was, did a curse come out when the sarcophagus was opened? As we all know, the world hasn't ended yet, so it must not have been totally cursed. However, we have had to deal with the coronavirus and a host of other disturbing, unfortunate, and alarming events over the last few years, so who knows? Maybe this sarcophagus was actually cursed, and we're living through its spell. Number 9. Zombie worms. A new genus of worms that live deep under the surface of the ocean was first discovered in the early 2000s and called Osedax. Now, before you get too terrified, these worms don't really have the potential to take a bite out of you, at least not while you're living. Though some people suspect that worm species are out there with the potential to actually attack living creatures, and have even theorized what they look like, scientists have only captured these small, 2-inch undersea animals so far. And how do they work exactly? Apparently, there are multiple different species among this genus, but they all live inside the bones of deceased whales or other dead animals on the sea floor. The first time they were discovered was at a depth of 10,000 feet within the carcass of a gray whale. They don't even have mouths, but they are some of the last scavengers in the circle of life that returns all the nutrients from the whale back into the food chain at the very bottom. You might ask how they consume the bones if they don't have mouths, right? They use acid. In fact, they release acid to break down the bones of long-dead whales, and then they have some bacteria that live in and on them to process and carry the fats and minerals into the worms themselves. It's totally bizarre, but then again, Osedax literally means bone-eating in Latin, so it's the perfect name for these disturbing zombie worms. They won't be bothering you anytime soon, though, as they don't seem to invade living organisms, least of all ones that spend most of their time above ground. But if you do go scuba diving deep under the sea, you can add zombie worms to the list of dangers to watch out for. Number 8. Disgusting fleshy orchids. 2020 was a year for the record books for sure, and not just in the world of virology and public health. Scientists tell us that they discovered a unique and disturbing-looking orchid variety in Madagascar last year. In fact, it's been called the most disgusting, ugliest orchid ever found. It's called the Gastrodia Agnicellus, and it has the fleshy brown flowers that look like they are already rotten from the moment they bloom. Imagine having a tree that looks like it's dead, covered in brown, bruised flowers. These look like nasty undersea creatures, or the result of a bouquet that's been sitting out too long. The flowers themselves are about half an inch in size and sit slightly above the forest floor in Madagascar, in one of the most remote parts of the world. On the bright side, apparently they don't smell too bad, so if you close your eyes, it's almost like you're sniffing roses. The Royal Botanic Gardens in the United Kingdom has recorded this creepy-looking plant as small, stunted, and ugly for all eternity. And if the scientists are willing to say that, it must be an awfully bizarre-looking flower. Would you ever give someone a bouquet with these if you didn't like them? Tell me how you'd prank someone with flowers like these in the comments section. Then remember to subscribe to The Biggest, if you haven't already, for more intense videos just like this one. Number 7. ultra black fish. A blacked out vehicle looks pretty cool, right? Heavily tinted windows, black paint, and black rims tend to elicit stares when driving down the street, but scientists are looking for material that absorbs way more light than a traditional glossy black paint. They've been looking in the lab and in nature to find substances that don't reflect any light at all, and in 2020 they found something remarkable in a deep-sea fish. One specific species, Anoplogaster cornuta, has scales that absorb a full 99.5% of all light shined at it. Why? It has to be for camouflage purposes down in the depths of the ocean, where the sun doesn't shine. This adaptation makes it harder for other fish, like anglerfish, to prey on this creature. Scientists found that this animal has special scales that cause the light that hits them to bounce around within the structure of the scale forever, attenuating and eventually disappearing completely. They want to use this to craft technology that allows us to better camouflage ourselves at night, as well as potentially making more effective telescopes that block out light pollution. After all, wearing a suit of blacked out fish scales would make you invisible at night, even to someone with night vision goggles. You'd be a fool not to try it. The creepy part, though, is how technology like this could enable criminals to move undetected. Let's hope it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Number 6. Mammoth Bone House. In March 2020, just as the world was getting hammered by the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, researchers in southwestern Russia were digging up something entirely otherworldly and totally spooky. It's a giant structure made out of animal bones. Imagine an igloo, but instead of being made out of blocks of ice, it was made out of the skeletons of woolly mammoths. This building was over 25,000 years old and most likely was used for storage of food or short-term camping. They didn't stay there for long periods of time, as it was difficult to cover a structure of this size with a roof. There was evidence of fires being maintained in the center of the structure, though. It was kind of like the prehistoric equivalent of a mountaintop cabin that park rangers use for storing supplies and staying safe during blizzards. And we all know there were a lot of blizzards in Eastern Europe during the Ice Age. Altogether, there were no fewer than 64 different woolly mammoths whose bones made up the massive ring, which was a full 40 feet in diameter. And their skulls likely stared down with empty eye sockets at these Stone Age cavemen, while the early humans conducted ceremonies or huddled together for warmth on the cold nights. If this mammoth boneyard turned into a campsite isn't totally creepy, I don't know what is. I certainly wouldn't camp out here. Number 5. Ancient cheese. Would you take a bite out of a rock-hard cheese from 3,300 years ago? In 2018, researchers did discover a bizarre and diseased piece of solid cheese in Egypt right after they found the mysterious black sarcophagus. It's totally poisonous, and you couldn't really even eat it as it was so hardened and gross. The substance was powdery when it was uncovered, which makes sense, as it was left to dry out for thousands of years. It was made out of cow's and goat's milk, then kept in a clay jar and forgotten about. In theory, you could rehydrate this cheese and try to eat it, but what would happen? Would you receive a nasty curse? You'd probably think you were cursed, or at least your digestive system would be cursed, because this cheese was home to bacteria and other unfriendly microbes. Specifically, the scientists found evidence that a microscopic creature called Brucella was living in this cheese, and that bacteria causes fever, diarrhea, and vomiting, along with other horrible symptoms. There's no need to even mention that you think you'd be brave enough to take a bite out of this mummified cheese. Scientists won't let you, and it would be incredibly foolish. Some old cheeses are safe to eat, but not this one. You can get cheddar cheese that's been aged for 10 years, but that's a far cry from this creepy, toxic cheese from ancient Egypt. Number 4. Murderous magnetic star. Pulsars are very dense, very hot stars that rotate extremely quickly and emit massive amounts of radiation out of their poles. This means that they are absolutely deadly if you get even remotely close. Let's put this into perspective. A neutron star can spin at 45,000 miles per second. It spins so fast that it puts out a strong magnetic field, way stronger than our planets and even stronger than our suns. Now, we all know what would happen if we got too close. This particular discovery, which is named GRO J100857, was found in 2020 by researchers and just shows how little we know about the extreme parts of our universe. We think we know creepy facts about life on our own planet, but there are stars, planets, and black holes out in space that make everything we know here on Earth look tame in comparison. Now, the unit of measurement for magnetic fields is called the Tesla. Funny how that works, right? And the difference between this pulsar and the sun is less than half a Tesla versus a 1 billion Tesla magnetic field. That's right, this star puts out a magnetic field over 2 billion times stronger than our sun's. That means that if you get even within a few million miles of this giant ball of supercharged matter, it would rip your body apart to the atoms and scatter them throughout deep space. Many years in the future, when our descendants are exploring space in their advanced rocket ships, they'll have to contend with powerful magnetic fields like this one, threatening to tear the metal from their spaceships and instantly kill them. As for humans today, we can just sit back in awe and fear of the power of the giants thousands of light years away from our happy little planet. Number 3, iron raindrops. You've heard of acid rain, right? When there's a lot of pollution in the sky, it can bind to raindrops and cause rain that erodes buildings because it's acidic and corrosive. That's bad enough, but now scientists have uncovered evidence of a planet where it rains molten iron. This disturbing image comes from the exoplanet WASP 76b, which is 640 light-years away in the constellation Pisces. The planet itself is extremely close to its parent star, where it whips around at incredible speed. Of course, it's ridiculously hot on that world, which is a gas giant that we could never set foot on. However, we can observe that the light side of the planet gets superheated, causing iron to vaporize and rise into the atmosphere. Then, when the wind blows the iron vapor around to the cool side away from its star, the iron condenses and drops out of the sky like rain. Hot, molten bullets of iron falling out of the sky. Creepy? I think so. Whatever aliens could colonize that planet would be totally terrifying and probably make short work of whatever defenses we have here on Earth. Number 2, lone skull in Italy. As recently as March 2021, a creepy find in a cave in northern Italy has scientists scratching their heads. First found in 2015, researchers are finally publishing their analysis of the origins of this bizarre discovery. They analyzed the skull that they found in a cave in the mountains. The creepiest part of this finding was that the skull was alone at the top of a 40-foot shaft within the cave. How in the world did a disembodied skull make its way to the ceiling of a hidden chamber within a cave? The analysts claim that it was part of a funeral 5,500 years ago. And what happened is after the soft tissues rotted away, the skull rolled into the cave, which then had moisture and erosion activity cut away a giant cavern beneath the platform where the skull was sitting patiently. That's the scientific explanation, but something about it doesn't sit right with me. What do you think deposited this skull on a raised shelf above a cavern deep in the mountains of Italy? Number 1. Giant living sea string. Where else but Australia would scientists unveil a strange string creature with a circumference of a staggering 150 feet? Off the coast of Western Australia, in some of the most remote waters in the Indian Ocean, a group in April 2020 found this thing, which they called a siphonophore, living peacefully at a depth of 2,000 feet. It resembles a giant spider web, or a whole can of silly string that got sprayed around deep under the ocean. It's actually a colony of many different tiny creatures called zooids. The total length of the string, if it were stretched end to end, is estimated at a mind-boggling 390 feet. The tiny members of the one organism, though, they can't survive on their own, but if they work together, they assemble a giant stinging net that captures prey large and small and devours it together. The different parts of the organism have different functions. Some swim, some sting, and some just consume and share the feast with the rest. If you got caught in this massive living underwater web, you probably wouldn't last very long. Good thing it's deep underwater and not close to the coastline. It sounds like a slow, painful death for the fish that do get captured. Hope you enjoyed learning about 10 of the creepiest recent discoveries in the world. Which one was your favorite? Tell me in the comments below. Thanks for watching, remember to subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.